Hello, this is Joseph from NoteFull, and I'm happy that you're here. In this video, what we're going to do, as you can tell, is we're going to work together to go through the new TOEFL speaking question number 3, which will appear on your exam in the TOEFL speaking after August, depending on when you're watching this video, which was the old TOEFL speaking question number 4 before August 2019. So just to give you a little background, we're going to talk about the changes, so you're clear on them. We're going to talk about which questions are being eliminated from the TOEFL speaking. We're also going to talk about the way you're going to be graded, because it's going to stay the same before and after August. But it's really important when you think about this question, how the graders are going to listen to your recording and what they're going to listen for. Because then you can, as you can imagine, understand what you need to do, what you need to say so that you get your dream score. Then what we're going to do is we're going to practice a question together, live, you and me, back and forth. So I hope you're excited. This video, I don't know, maybe anywhere from 40 to 70 minutes. It depends on the flow that we develop, but I want it to be very comfortable. So, usually when we start the classes, we just say, take a deep breath. Right, get ready to learn, have your scratch paper ready, and let's dig in and spend about an hour together and really work and master the new TOEFL speaking question number 3. So let's jump into the screen, and what you see here is a little outline of what you can expect. So for those of you familiar, let me go ahead and bring in a different color here. So before August 2019, the TOEFL speaking had 6 questions, right? And then beginning in August 2019 and afterwards until the TOEFL changes again, question number 1 and question number 5 have been eliminated. So that means the old question 2, 3, 4, and 6 are now turning into the questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the TOEFL speaking. So that's why we're saying we're going to learn the new TOEFL speaking question number 3, which is the old TOEFL speaking question number 4. So only 4 questions in the TOEFL speaking. Now that means each question, of course, carries more weight. But the thing is, now you're only preparing for 4 questions. So overall, this is, in my opinion, very good news for you. So something to get excited about and feel positive about. Now let's talk about how you're graded, because before we jump into this question, we want to refresh our memory on what's happening that's going to determine our dream score. So you're going to record an answer, right, on the TOEFL speaking on the computer automatically, 60 seconds. And there are 2 different raters that are going to listen to you. And they're going to evaluate your score either a 1, 2, 3, or 4. And as you can imagine, 4 is the top rating. And if you get 2 4s, you get a 30 out of 30. So because you have 4 questions, because you're rated 1 through 4, a couple things happen. It can be very dramatic how long you'll be stuck in a 3 rating before you jump into a 4 and see your score shift. Because if you think about it, every single recording that the graders hear is going to fall into one of 4 categories, not one of 10. So the difference between a score of 3 and a score of 4 is significant in what it sounds like. So we're going to train for that and see what they're actually listening for. So depending on where you're coming from in the sense of whether you're getting an 18 on the speaking and you need a 26 plus, or whether you're getting a 24 and you need a 26 plus, or wherever you might be, we found that most of our students are essentially looking to move from a 3 rating into a 4 rating. So we're going to concentrate in this video in exactly how to do that, and that's going to translate to scores of 24 to 30 out of 30 on the TOEFL speaking. Right? So those are great scores. You can get them. I hope you're excited. So now that I hope that's clear, let's go ahead and go down. And I just wanted to confirm, because every now and then students ask, what questions are going to be eliminated and how do we know? So this is a little pic that we took from a PDF released from TOEFL. So they're not really displaying it everywhere on their site, but you can see that they're saying questions 1 and 5 are being removed. Right? And this is a release that they sent out. And so if you click on the link below this video, you're going to be taken to our page on the site where you can download this. And this document that we're creating right now is a PDF, and get more help on the TOEFL speaking. So now that we talked about that, right, we're pretty much all clear. Let's get a sense of what your new TOEFL speaking question 3 is going to be like, whether you've taken the TOEFL or not. So you sit down, you're taking the TOEFL, right? You finish questions 1 and 2, and how does question 3 start? Well, the first thing is you're going to be given a reading. And so this reading will have a title, and then it'll have a short passage of about 100 words. Essentially, you can think about it as the title being a word and or a concept, and then the 100 words being a definition or description or expansion of it, something that you'd find in a textbook. After that, you're going to hear a lecture illustrate what you just learned about. So they're going to talk about maybe some kind of phenomenon, right? We'll say XYZ animal behavior. And then you'll have 100 words that describe that behavior. And then you're going to hear a lecture for about anywhere from 1.5 minutes, can be 1 minute 40 seconds, but a good amount of time that gives a solid example, rarely 2, that illustrates what you just read about. After that, you're going to be given a question that asks you to kind of integrate, that's why this is called the integrated speaking question, the lecture and the reading. So it's very important to know that you're actually going to do some work besides just repeat what you read and heard. You're going to show how the lecture illustrates the concept that was defined or described in 100 words. That's going to be your question pretty much all the time. After that, the computer is going to give you 30 seconds to prepare. Really powerful 30 seconds where you can organize your notes. We're going to show you how to do that. Feel confident, get yourself prepped to get your dream score. So I hope you're smiling and ready to discover that. And of course, the next thing is the computer will record you for 60 seconds. And so it'll automatically record you. You'll see a bar that indicates where you are in the time, so you can manage your time for the 30 seconds and the 60 seconds. And then when the 60 seconds are up, the recording finishes whether you're cut off or not. It's saved and sent out. You don't have to do anything, and then you move on to question number 4. So that's this point here where the computer saves it, right? So I hope that's pretty clear. If not, you can just, click back to maybe a few minutes into the video and hear this again. But we're going to practice this, so this will be very clear very soon. And if you've taken the TOEFL before, you're probably ready to get to this part. What we want to do is take a moment to discover how the graders are trained. Now, we're not going to go into detail because, that's the company, the TOEFL, that makes the exam, and so they don't release exactly how they train raters. But a couple things are important. The first thing is that every rater rates a series of recordings, usually part-time, usually from home. They log in and they listen. What we've learned is that usually what they do is they calibrate their recordings. So what happens is when they start, they have these test recordings, right? So you can say test recording A, B, C, and D. And these recordings are meant to get a specific score. So the TOEFL considers this recording, let's say, a 3 out of 4, and this one a 2 out of 4, and this one a 1, and this one a 4, something like that. So the grader will evaluate these kind of test recordings. And if the grader's scores match what the company expects, then they are allowed to continue to rate the rest of the recordings. And so as you can imagine, we're lucky enough to talk to raters, give you this very special information. And what this does is it reminds you that this is very rigid, that these people are trained very specifically to listen for certain criteria. There is some subjectivity, which means it depends on the person listening. But in the end, there are very specific criteria to focus on, and that's what we'll learn today. And if what we learned is, let's say that they don't hit these scores, they're off. Maybe when they're supposed to rate a 4, they rated a 3, or vice versa. From what we heard, they can't score for that day. They have to kind of wait for another day. It all depends. At the same time, too, raters have a supervisor. They're called like leaders, so we'll just say that. So they're individuals responsible for making sure that there's standardization. So in other words, what I want to say is, it's very important, since everyone's taking such special time to consider how they're scoring you, for you to know how you're scored, so when you answer, you can predict what score you'll get. Now, this is the rubric that ETS, the company that makes the TOEFL, releases to everybody, so it's not going to be so special that it tells us exactly what the graders listen for. But I would like you now, because we're in the tutoring session, right? Me and you working together. It would be great if you pause this video and just read through this comfortably, recognizing that the TOEFL is dividing your answer into the delivery, how you sound giving your answer, the language use, which means the word choice, the grammatical accuracy, clarity with which you speak, and topic development, which essentially means you're answering the question. You're not repeating yourself. You're explaining yourself well. So pause the video, read through this. Okay, I'm gonna assume you did that, which is great. And now you'll see here that I edited the key criteria to consider when you think about delivering your answer. And you'll learn this in future videos, but this is for questions 2, 3, and 4. New TOEFL speaking questions 2, 3, and 4, which are considered integrated, where you're doing something a little special. So the general description, okay, so what we want to do is we want to move from a rating of a 3 to a rating of a 4, or wherever we are, right? So we skipped the criteria for ratings of 1 and 2, because we know most of you are looking for getting into the 20s, mid-20s, high 20s. So we need 3s and 4s. So what's the difference? Well, let's start with topic development. A 4 is a clear progression of idea. A 3 is choppiness in the progression of ideas. That simply means that you need to think carefully so that you speak in an order that makes sense. Very simply, if you're describing something, you're saying something like A, B, C, and D, rather than saying A, and then C, and then B, and then D. Kind of this hopping back and forth, right? We want to flow through our notes from the top to the bottom, basically explaining things in the same order that we hear them, the same order that we read them. The next thing is a 4 rating conveys the relevant information. This is so important. Essentially, the main idea matters, the details don't. Now, you do need details, of course, to get your 4, because you do need to say enough information. But it's very important right now. I want you to know, in fact, so important, I want to talk to you right now face to face, that in the years and years we've been doing this, right, over a decade, think about how many students we've worked with, and think about how many patterns we've seen. So for you to succeed, I'm imagining that you might have difficulty with time management. What that means is you're probably getting cut off by the timer. And it's rare, but you might be finishing, 15, 14, 10 seconds early. The majority of you are probably getting cut off. And that's from this pressure that I have to say everything. But if you remember, you have a 100-word reading, and you have about a lecture that takes a minute, minute and a half. So by definition, the TOEFL is giving you more than you can say. So you have to recognize this is an exam of you picking the important information. And we're going to help you discover what that is. But right now, I want us to switch. You don't have to say everything. And in fact, if you try to, you're falling for a trap. So you need to say the key points. So we're going to talk about that. For a 3 rating, so we go back into the screen here, some incompleteness, inaccuracy, or lack of specificity. Essentially, this kind of feedback comes into when you're describing something that you describe it completely. Oftentimes, let's say you hear that there is a blue desk in the corner. You might say it, right? Or you might say desk. And all of a sudden, you're no longer specific. You're general, unclear, difficult to follow. So it's very important that you describe and say what you're saying fully. Now, some of you might worry, but these have a lot of key words. What if I miss something? It's okay. You don't have to be perfect to get a 4 out of 4, but just what you know, say, because many students, they know and they remember that the desk is blue and in the corner, but they won't say that. So now let's go to language use. And topic development, appropriate detail, which is what we said. Basically, you're focusing on what's important to answer the question versus just let me say everything. Now, does that make sense? So let's go to language use, right? Coherent, efficient, automatic expression of relevant ideas. What this means is you sound fluent. You are able to move from one sentence to another without too much struggle. You don't have a tendency to repeat yourself because we often hear students restart sentences, which is a habit we really want to avoid. So what does that mean? That's kind of like if you say, the professor describes the vulture as a vulture is a vulture. You see that kind of restarting the sentence? So we don't move smoothly from one point to another. Effective word choice. This is really important. This just basically means you don't have to have perfect grammar, but you need to care about it. Subject, verb, object. Because word choice often comes down to, sometimes like we pick words that don't really match, but we find this, usually the part of speech is awkward or we don't have a nice complete sentence. So for example, we might say, the man to go is home, right? So the man to go is home. It's almost like we're just saying key words rather than actually doing our best to speak with precision. So we can say, the man went home. In the example, the professor explains that his friend went home. The next thing is, does not require listener effort. This is so important. This is just a key idea for you to realize. If I have to infer, think, reflect, connect from listening to your words, that's going to drop you to a 3. Basically you're speaking to a baby. You're teaching something. I should need to use my brain 0%. You use your full brain power, right? So here's your head. Here's the listener's head, right? So here's you, Y for you. Here's the rater. Okay, so that's your brain. You use 100% of your brain power to explain things clearly, and the rater needs to use 0% of his or her brain to understand you. And you see, of course, that means a 3 is some imprecise or inaccurate use of vocabulary or grammar. Now, that's one of the reasons why now we start to tell students, you don't have to speak quickly, you don't have to speak nonstop, but you do need to focus on making every sentence you deliver excellent. And excellent is kind of a tough word, right? It's a demanding word, but it is important because you can do it. You have excellent ability. I know you do because you can listen to me, you can read all this. This is quite advanced. You just need to use your full power. Now let's talk about delivery. Delivery is something we train students on a lot. And essentially, the way we train them is to just allow themselves to remember that every word is made up of sounds. So we notice students sometimes in the desire to speak quickly or to get through information, they really don't pay any attention to the sounds they're making. So words will have dropped not just S's, but T's and D's, and all of a sudden, I may not be able to understand a sentence because the clarity isn't there. So make sure you pronounce every sound in the word. And the overall intelligibility remains high, just means I can understand you from beginning to end. Now, when you have 1 or 2 sounds that you don't pronounce well, it's not a big deal. Everyone has an accent. But it means that there are words that are just kind of difficult to pick up. So it requires listener effort. So now that we've gone through this, I hope that you have a clarity on this. And let me talk to you one-on-one now. So we did a lot of very solid work because now we know what we need to do, the way that we need to speak, how we need to express ourselves. And you can do it, right? Because you're listening. The fact that you can listen to me at this level indicates you have the power to communicate at this level, or very close to it. So we like to teach, think first, speak second. That's going to be the key to your success. Because to improve, you actually have to reflect a little bit. It might slow you down, but then you'll speed up. But when you slow down and think first, speak second, you develop better habits of clarity, a better sentence structure, clear understanding of how to express yourself. So you need to develop that, then you get comfortable with practice, you speak quickly, you get your dream score. So to say it again, as you practice, what you're first slow in, as with anything else, becomes easier. So we want to make sure that, depending on where you are, some of you will watch this, and this will be enough for you to improve. Like, right? Some of you are like, okay, let's get to the question already. But I'm happy you're here with me because in my experience, if we skip this and we don't really understand it, we're going to be practicing for hours and we're going to be getting the same score test after test. And I know you don't want that, right? Maybe you've already experienced that. So now that we know this, now that you can, review and repeat this video and really think clearly, let's dig in, okay? So this is the structure that we're going to talk about later, but let's actually do a question together. So here we go, question number 4. We're going to go through it together. I'd like you to have your eyes just on me, watch me go through this, watch how I take notes, we'll talk about it, and then it'll be your turn to go over it. And so we're going to take turns practicing. So first, I'm going to click play. This is going to guide us through every part. It'll be similar to, but not exact to what you can experience, what you will experience on the TOEFL. To prepare our notes, what we want to understand is the relationship between the reading and the lecture. That's what we're going to express. So what I like to do is tell students and tell you that in your scratch paper, you want a T for topic. And then you want a D, which can be a definition or a description. There's going to be an explanation of that topic. So by putting T and D in your scratch paper, right before you start this question on the TOEFL speaking, it trains your brain, reminds you of what you're listening for. And then you're going to hear a lecture, that's L for lecture, that's going to illustrate that. Now, let's go ahead and begin again. And I'm going to change the color just so that we can see the prep and then the work. Even though on the TOEFL you'll just have one pencil or pen. Okay, now I'm going to stop the video and I'm just going to go over with you a little bit the notes that I took on the reading. So, working on my penmanship, I'll go over this so that we can look at it together. But a few things. When I took notes, I read first, understood, and then took notes. I didn't do it together because what we notice is that if you take notes at the same time you read, it'll be challenging. You'll forget. You'll be disconnected. You won't know how to explain. And to get a 4, your comprehension is essential. So always take notes on the title, full, complete, 100%. Oftentimes you'll see it repeated in the question, but it's important to write it down, put it in your brain. Now you'll see that I put dashes around key words that I've written to help me remember what I understood. Your notes are not to record what you have. Your notes are key words to help you remember what you understood. Now I have 3, so this is already kind of a lot of information. I'm not really going to have time to say this all unless I speak quickly. So for the purposes of our example, I won't say it all. So as I take notes, I recognize these 2 pieces of information are the essential ones. So as I'm taking notes in my brain, I'm recognizing, okay, what's this topic? How do I describe it? What you can do, so when you train yourself, you can pause yourself in the middle and just see, can you explain from your notes the reading? So let's go ahead and do that now, right? And I'm going to follow my notes with my finger, which is my pen, to describe the reading under TOEFL conditions. So how would I say this? Okay, the reading is about coevolution, which is described as occurring when 2 species intermingle to the point that they influence each other's evolution, and they do this in order to maintain their connection. Now, when I spoke, I recognized, actually, I need to kind of say all of this in order to express it clearly. So even though I wanted to skip some information, I recognize, if I skip it, it won't be so good. Now, there are different ways you can do this. So for example, So I hope you understood this test. And now what I want to do is I want to go back and I want to have you take notes. I want to have you take notes and then see if you can explain. So let's go through these 45 seconds again. This time you take notes in your scratch paper fresh. Don't take notes exactly as I did, right? That's not the goal. Take notes where you yourself are taking notes, understanding first, taking notes second, so that you can express what you're taking notes on. Here we go, your turn. Okay, now let's come up here and talk together. So how was that? Always going to be like that on the TOEFL question number 4. It could be a topic about, animal biology, animal behavior. Can be, usually you have a lot of psychology, human psychology. Sometimes you get some, those are the most common. You have many different things, but those are things that you can prepare for. Now, what I'd like you to do is pause the video, follow your notes with your finger to make sure that you're precise and specific. Listen to yourself and practice what you just learned. Express it clearly and simply as if you're talking not to a baby, because a baby wouldn't understand. But I think you got the idea when I said that. But like a kid who's very curious, who asks you what coevolution is. The key thing is to limit what you say to about 2 or 3 sentences, because you need to say it in about 15 seconds. You can't describe it all, but give me the idea. So I want you to pause the video and practice that a few times so you recognize why you're reading, why you're taking notes, and can you do that? Because if you can't do that, we're not really ready to jump into the lecture. So go ahead, pause the video and practice that for about 5 to 10 minutes. All right, so I'll assume you did that. And so what the lecture is going to do is it's going to illustrate this. 80 to 90% of the time, you'll hear the professor give an example, just one example, one pair of species that illustrate coevolution. Sometimes you'll get 2. You'll get 2 examples. The same thing applies. You can just understand that you are using both examples, or you are explaining how both examples illustrate the definition. Now, here's kind of a really big deal. This is why you're watching the video. When you explain the lecture, you need to show, prove, make sure the grader knows that you're not just repeating what the lecture said, but you need to add words. You need to enhance something that shows, I recognize this part of the example illustrates this part of the definition. And if we train in this back and forth, you're going to develop that skill strong. The graders are going to hear what they need. As long as you do the other things that we train you on, time management, speaking with clarity, making sure you speak with grammatical clarity, you'll get your dream score, right? So it's kind of exciting. So let's go ahead and look and kind of prepare ourselves for the lecture. Okay, so if we look back at our notes, how many species do you think we're going to talk about? I know it's just a video. Maybe you can freak out the people around you. You could talk to the video. But are we going to get 3 species or 4? No, right? We're going to get 2. Now, are these 2 species going to hate each other? Or are they going to have a very close relationship, right? We can have, 2 different species of cats, 2 different species of birds, maybe a species of, ants and the trees that they live on, something like that, right? They influence each other's evolution. Now, this is important because what you can anticipate is they're changing, right? Something happens in their relationship where one changes and the other changes. And why do they do this? Because for some reason they benefit from each other, right? They need each other. They don't want to lose the relationship. So by understanding the reading, you set yourself up for success in the lecture. Now, let's go back into the conversation between us, because experience has shown me that you might be having some questions right now. Like, Joe, what if I don't finish the reading? In that case, I have a simple tip, very powerful. Move your eyes faster. Sometimes it's challenging because students want to understand every sentence. If that's what you do, you're reading by feeling as opposed to the conditions of the exam. And remember, you don't have to be perfect to get a 4 out of 4, but you do have to be strong. And if you study the reading, you're going to notice that it can be quite repetitive. So if you move and read carefully from beginning to end, you force yourself not to linger, but to move your eyes fast enough to cover the information in 40 seconds, 43 seconds. The amount of repetition, just if you don't take any notes, just read the reading, you'll understand. So sometimes what we train with students is go ahead and go through the reading, don't take any notes, and then tell me what you understood, and often there's a very good understanding. So that's a test to see whether or not your notes are distracting you. And if they are, then you have to remember, understand first, take notes second. So now let's jump into the lecture. You'll see me take notes, and then you will. So let's jump in here, right? Keep having fun with the TOEFL. Okay, here we go. I know exactly what I'm listening for. I know what I'm going to get, an example, maybe two, rarely. Let me just get my pen ready here. Okay, so let's go ahead and listen.
Two species that have developed a close relationship are the fruit-eating birds of the tropical rainforests and the plants that grow the fruit they consume. This close relationship between the birds and the trees has become so strong that adaptations can be seen in each that are direct results of the other. These birds get a large amount of their nourishment from the fruits of these trees. They could not survive without them. Yet these fruits are not easy for the birds to consume. They contain large seeds that are nearly impossible for the birds to separate from the nutritious flesh of the fruit. As a result, to acquire the nourishment they need, these birds must swallow the fruit completely. To do this, they have evolved larger, wider bills that allow them to do just that, swallow both the seed and flesh of the fruit together, which demonstrates how the birds evolved to maintain this close connection. Second, these birds cannot digest the seeds of these fruits, so they are removed from the body as waste. This usually occurs as the bird is flying, which spreads the seeds across the forest floor, thereby securing the growth of the next generation of these plants. To keep this relationship strong, the trees have undergone special adaptations. You see, these birds possess highly evolved visual systems that allow them to see color quite clearly. So these trees have evolved fruits that are more brightly colored, which makes them easier for the birds to recognize and then eat. This shows how the plants evolved to maintain this ecologically beneficial relationship. They could not survive without them.
Okay, so let's go ahead and review. So it's kind of a good one, a tough one, right? I picked one to challenge you, but I hope you learn from it. So we have a lot of notes, but remember what we learned. Do we need to say everything? Yes or no? I can imagine 30% of you saying yes and 70% of you saying no. No. You do not need to say everything. If you try to say everything, you'll run out of time, fall into the trap, and start to keep getting a 3. You can get cut off and get a 4 out of 4 if you say enough, clearly enough, but we don't want to rely on that. So what is the key information here? Now, do you see how I drew the arrows? That's a nice little technique that I'd like you to apply and try. As you listen, recognize what part of the example illustrates what part of the definition. And I think it's quite obvious because the professor did it for us. The professor won't always make it so clear. Sometimes you'll need to figure it out because the professor here said they evolved larger bills to maintain their connection. And then here the professor said they evolved brighter colored fruit to maintain their connection. This is how they influenced each other's evolution. Now, this is so important that we're going to repeat it more than once, right? Many times. So when you're taking notes, again, you want to, in your brain, be understanding first, taking notes second, and connecting and being open to that point in the lecture that begins to connect with the explanation of the definition, right? The connection between the details in the lecture that illustrate the definition. Now, in this example from the professor, we have 2 points that are really powerful in connecting with the definition. There are several other points, but these are the big ones. And oftentimes there'll be 2. So maybe you have 2 parts to a definition and you need to know where each part is, discussed, so you can reference the words in the definition as you explain. So just to train ourselves, we're going to repeat this one more time, because having the connection where you repeat the words of the definition in the intelligent and appropriate place in the lecture, in the explanation of it, is what's going to be a defining factor in moving you from a 3 to a 4 rating. And it's very simple. So something like this, let's do the first one again. So the birds evolved larger and wider bills to maintain the connection with the trees. And so you see that evolved and maintain connection is the direct integration of the definition and the example. Now, the professor did a lot of the work for us. On the TOEFL, that won't always happen, because you see how I have notes evolved, which means the professor said that. So they created that clarity for us, and that won't always happen. So we need to be prepared to do that work. Now for the second one, that would sound something like, and the birds evolved more brightly colored fruit to maintain the connection with the birds. Now, when I did that, do you see how I'm using words in the definition as I describe the details in the lecture? That's the tough part. That's the part that demonstrates your fluency, and that's why it's going to earn you a 4. Now, you'll also notice that I changed the words a little bit. Like here we have fruits, bright color. So I changed the order just to make a simple grammatically correct sentence. So we always want to use our critical thinking, follow our notes in basically the same order, but at the same time know that sometimes we're going to need to express that extra information. Okay? And now what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to organize our notes, how to prepare in the 30 seconds that we have. So I'm going to bring the timer up, our own timer. And when you prepare, what you want to do is you want to draw 3 circles. And as you draw the circles, remind yourself of the fact that you need to explain this clearly in your answer. So one will go around the title, the topic, the keyword, the concept. The other will go around the words that explain, define, describe that topic. And then finally the lecture. As you're drawing circles, you're reviewing the words, you're seeing the keywords, you're reminding yourself of this. And you either want to underline or make a little note, like a little star. It's not the best star, but a little star here around the points in the lecture where you definitely want to integrate the words in the definition, because that is the question. How does the example illustrate the concept? So you need to show that you understand the concept and that you understand the parts of the lecture, the example that illustrate that concept. No better way than specifically saying it and integrating it. So let's go ahead, start the timer, you watch me, and then it's your turn. So here we go. All right, now let's talk one-on-one here, because what I'd like to do, now that I have you and we're tutoring again, is kind of to show you how that process was, how we took notes on the reading in order to understand how to explain that concept. So we understand first, take notes second. how we listen to the lecture, listening with anticipation for how this lecture, this example, one or two, is going to illustrate the definition. And we have our ears open for the part of the lecture that illustrates the definition. So we draw an arrow, we make a connection, we draw a star, we keep that in our brain. And then when we prepare in our 30 seconds, we comfortably and slowly draw 3 circles. And that helps us remember the structure, the key words, reviews, refresh our memory, and then make a little star if we haven't already about that key point that's going to make sure that we boost to a 4 out of 4 rating, as long as we're speaking clearly and comfortably, of the part of the lecture that illustrates the definition. So now the fun part, it's your turn. So what you're going to do is you're going to take notes, just as I did, in your scratch paper, for yourself, understanding first, taking notes second. And the key thing is, even though you've heard this before, the goal for you to improve your score is to train those key habits that you can apply to any question on any topic that are fundamental to succeed. So you want to be practicing this so that when you try a new question after this, you have the ability to do what we did, where you take notes by understanding first, taking notes second, finding that key point. I'm saying it 3 or 4 times now because it's so important. And then after that, you're going to have your 30 seconds to prepare, and you want to draw the circles just as I did. So it's almost like doing a practice before you do something fresh, where this is really important training. So good luck, your scratch paper. Let's listen again and prepare our notes. Ready? Let's begin.
2 species that have developed a close relationship are the fruit-eating birds of the tropical rainforests and the plants that grow the fruit they consume. This close relationship between the birds and the trees has become so strong that adaptations can be seen in each that are direct results of the other. These birds get a large amount of their nourishment from the fruits of these trees. They could not survive without them. Yet these fruits are not easy for the birds to consume. They contain large seeds that are nearly impossible for the birds to separate from the nutritious flesh of the fruit. As a result, to acquire the nourishment they need, these birds must swallow the fruit completely. To do this, they have evolved larger, wider bills that allow them to do just that. Swallow both the seed and flesh of the fruit together, which demonstrates how the birds evolved to maintain this close connection. Second, these birds cannot digest the seeds of these fruits, so they are removed from the body as waste. This usually occurs as the bird is flying, which spreads the seeds across the forest floor, thereby securing the growth of the next generation of these plants. To keep this relationship strong, the trees have undergone special adaptations. You see, these birds possess highly evolved visual systems that allow them to see color quite clearly. So these trees have evolved fruits that are more brightly colored, which makes them easier for the birds to recognize and then eat. This shows how the plants evolved to maintain this ecologically beneficial relationship. They could not survive without them.
Explain the concept of coevolution using the example discussed in the lecture. So you get your question read out loud to you on the TOEFL, and it transitions after that into your 30 seconds to prepare. So just giving you some space, and ready, and begin preparing your notes now. So it's cool taking turns, right? Some of you probably really smooth, cleared everything up. Others, we realize, oh, I need to rewatch this video a few times. But I hope that what has become clear is the process and the goal. We take notes on the reading, we understand it, concept, description, definition. We get the lecture, we take notes, understand first, take notes second, anticipating what we're going to hear, listening for that part of the example that illustrates the definition, making a note of it, and then drawing our circles to, like, kind of absorbing the question, which is always going to be the same. It's going to repeat the title or the concept. So it's going to ask something like how the birds in the trees in the rainforest illustrate the concept of coevolution, or how is the concept of coevolution explained with the example provided by the professor. So the question is always going to frame that idea of how does the example illustrate the definition. So when we prepare, we organize ourselves just as we learned. We draw the circles, we make the stars, or whatever you want to signify that part of the lecture where you need to add your own language, you need to bring it in. So now the fun part, okay, the exciting part. This is where we practice delivering an answer in 60 seconds that will get our dream score. So my goal, I'm going to go ahead and bring out here a different color. Let's bring out yellow. And I'm going to use my highlighter when you see it on the screen to symbolize my following my notes with my finger. So I want you to do the same so that you say the specific words you need to say. You follow the same order of the whole thing so it's smooth and clear and simple. And you just need that point where you say the extra that makes the connection, gets you your dream score. Now, how are we going to do this? Let me go ahead and let's drop back into the screen, and I'm going to share with you the template that we use to answer. Now, super important, we're going to say a couple of things. This works perfectly fine. It will never work, though, when we memorize it and just apply it without thinking. So what a template is a guided way to create transitions from one part of your speech into another. Transitioning is critical. How you transition needs to be specific to what's happening. So that means you need to use your critical thinking. So for example, we can say something like the article discusses coevolution, or the reading is about coevolution, or we learn in the reading about the concept of coevolution. This phrase is not going to help or hurt our score. It just creates the structure of how we're going to introduce the topic, the concept. Then we transition, which the passage defines as. Now you want to be careful. You can memorize this, but sometimes it'll be a description. Sometimes it'll sound more like an explanation, and a definition won't necessarily work. You can also change the language. So it can be something like, the reading explains that this occurs when, or this is defined as, so you can start a new sentence. It's just a transition. You want to use your critical thinking to be accurate and to make it fit grammatically within what you're saying. The next thing is when we get into the example. Now the professor provides an example of something, here birds and trees to illustrate this. Can be a bit wordy, and so depending on you can transition smoothly by saying the professor talks about birds and trees to illustrate this, or the professor illustrates this with many different ways to transition into the lecture. That's one of them, and you always want to make sure it fits grammatically with what you're saying. As you explain the information, you're just going from point to point, perhaps saying he states that, she adds that kind of thing. Being careful that you use he or she appropriately, right? And then the final thing is to conclude. Now, concluding is important. Some graders like to see that. So let me go ahead and talk to you for a minute. So when you conclude, it's not critical to get your dream score. If you don't conclude, that doesn't mean you automatically get a 3 out of 4 or a 22 out of 30 when you're looking to improve more and more. What a conclusion does is it's just a powerful way to demonstrate your understanding, the fact that you can manage your time, you're comfortable with the language, and also, if you think about it, a conclusion is not just a memorized expression. It's actually a clear, necessary way to put an end to what you've stated, because you've essentially given me the points of where the example illustrates the definition. You talked about all these great things, and so it's only natural for you to say, and so this, what I just explained, is how the professor uses the example of birds and trees to illustrate the concept of coevolution. You don't have to say all those words, but I wanted to give you a sense that the conclusion has a purpose. If we just think about it as something memorized that we say at the end, it has no power. But we want it to be the punch at the end of our speech that really shows, pow, I did what you asked of me, I finished on time, I mentioned all the key points, and I'm giving you a nice summary and conclusion at the end. So that's what we want to think about. The other thing is that if you train yourself to conclude, what you're doing is giving yourself some insurance or a buffer, right? B-U-F-F-E-R, a little space of safety where if you say a little bit more about the example than you anticipated, you can sacrifice the conclusion and still give all the important content. So it's like a little bit of insurance because it's that last thing that you can give up if necessary, though that's only in a mistake or a difficulty, won't hurt your score. But if you don't train with a conclusion and you go over time, then you're going to be cut off in important content. And then that's where we kind of get into trouble with our dream score. Does that make sense? So that's about the conclusion, about the template. We still need to think critically, and they're just sentences to help us transition, but we need to adjust them to match what we heard. And that's where you come in with your critical thinking and you make sure the words match. So let's go back into the screen. And the other thing that's important is time management, critical. Because you want to finish with the topic and the description of it and transitioning within 20 seconds. So by the time your timer moves across about a third of the way through, you know, when you go down to around the 40-second mark, around that approximate area, that's when you want to transition into the actual lecture. Then you spend about 37 seconds on it, the majority of your speech, explaining it, describing it, and how it illustrates the example. And then at 3 seconds, you know, when there's a little bit left on your timer, that's where you give the conclusion. And so you finish by 1, 2, or 0 seconds left. Okay. So with that said, now you'll hear me go through it. And let me go ahead and bring this up here. All right, it's the fun time. Let's see how we do. So I'll go first, you know, to break the ice, and then you do it just to kind of learn. Here we go. So after 30 seconds to prepare, automatically we get recorded, 1 minute. Here we go. Let's repeat our question. And remember, it's always the same, but I just want you to have a sense of it. Explain the concept of coevolution using the example discussed in the lecture. Okay, so how am I going to do that? Here we go. The article is about coevolution, which is defined as occurring when two species intermingle so much that they begin to influence each other's evolution, to maintain their connection. And the professor provides an example of fruit-eating birds in the tropical rainforest and the plants, the trees, that have this fruit they consume. The professor explains that these birds cannot easily consume the fruit because the seeds are so large. So the birds evolved larger and wider bills so they can maintain this connection with the trees and the fruit. The professor then explains that these birds spread the seeds as waste as they fly, which secures the next generation of these plants. So they have adapted because the birds can see very well. So the trees evolved fruits that are more brightly colored to maintain the connection. And that's how the professor uses this example to illustrate coevolution. All right, so we went through that nice and smooth from beginning to end. And I hope you noticed that I spoke relatively quickly, but depending on you and my experience, I've noticed that a lot of students can speak at that same pace, carefully, slowly, and much faster. So my goal in giving that answer was to be smooth, thoughtful, and connected, illustrating every point. A couple of things that I want you to be aware of. Let's go back into the screen. Do you notice how here I did pretty much mention everything? And I did that because with my critical thinking, I believe that's important so that I can make everything clear to the grader that I understand and answer the question well. Then when I gave the example, as you know, there's too much information, right? We have a 100-word reading and a lecture that is more than 1 minute. By definition, we cannot say everything. So as a result, I got to the point. I focused on the main things that illustrate coevolution. And so you see how I followed, with the yellow, that represents following my notes with my finger, but I skipped. But I did not skip the information with the star. I skipped to that information. So this helps because when I'm up here, let's say, let me change the color, let me make it black. Let's say I'm over here and I realize I'm running out of time. I just jump here and say what's necessary for it to make sense. If I spend too much time on the first half of the lecture, then I jump over here and just say enough to make it make sense so that I do what's critical and important. And so as long as I'm speaking at a decent pace, which you will, and I'm focusing on word clarity, good word grouping as I speak, and I follow my notes in this way, then I'm on track to succeed. So now it's your turn. So I want you to take a deep breath, right? Do the best applying what you've just learned. And remember, we're going to give this a try a couple times. This is training. So remember to look at the timer, adjust as necessary, get to the point, and know your priority, answering that question. So let me go ahead and actually split screen this. Or let's make it full screen. Good luck, do your best, and begin. All right, how was that? Congratulations. We went through a question together, studied everything. The changes to the TOEFL, what the graders are listening for, the structure of this question, how to go about answering it, and what we need to do to succeed. And we tried it. So, however you did, what would you rate yourself? A 3 or a 4, that answer? Where are you around? And allow yourself just to keep training, keep reviewing. And so we're going to do a little bit more and then we'll finish up because I want to give you something else that's quite powerful to support you. So if you click on the link below this video, you'll see the PDF that we used and that we referenced to download for yourself. And you'll also see this question so that you can practice it from beginning to end without interruption. And you want to do that several times until you get the training necessary to succeed. And if you need more help, when you click on that link, you'll be on our site. So you can investigate, get the self-study material, online classes to work together, small group tutoring, all that stuff for extra support on the speaking in every section. So with that said, now I want to tell you an extra powerful tip to train your ability to get to the main point. What we're going to do now is we're going to try to answer this key point, this main idea, in 30 seconds without using our notes. So it's full brain power, builds that skill. So I'll do it first to illustrate, and then you do it, and let's see how we do. So let's jump into the screen. 30 seconds, no notes, just from the brain, explaining everything, but only the main points. No time for anything else. So here we go. The article is about coevolution, which is defined as occurring when two species intermingle so much that they influence each other's evolution to maintain their connection. The professor illustrates this by saying that a bird evolved a wider bill to maintain the relationship with the tree that has the fruit it consumes, and the tree evolved more brightly colored fruit to attract the bird to maintain that relationship. All right, so it's challenging. But you see how it's almost like a little puzzle. It forced me to just get right to the point, to really just use my critical thinking to know what my priority is. So now it's your turn. It'll be challenging. Maybe you won't do it on time, but don't use your notes because your notes will kind of push you to try to say details. Just use your critical thinking, your memory, do your best, training you to identify and speak the main idea. All right, so deep breath. Right, I can do it. Set yourself into positive thinking. So we say, I can do it. Let's look at the timer and begin. All right, and that concludes things. So it was a good challenge, right? I'm sure maybe you did it, maybe you didn't do it, but the effort is training you. And so what you can do when you train, if you click on the link, you practice or whatever you do, you might want to alternate between 30 seconds and 60. And what you'll start to notice is that your notes may be pushing an old habit of trying to say everything you see and not thinking at all about creating the connection. And then at 30 seconds without your notes, it's like the complete opposite. So you're just focusing on the main point, getting to it, putting sentences together that illustrate, don't say anything extra. And when you go back and forth, you will learn how to apply that into the question that you answer in 60 seconds, and you'll notice the quality of your answer change, the clarity improve, and your ability to let go of minor details increase. So it was a pleasure working with you. I hope you now feel more confident with the new TOEFL Speaking Question 3. You know what to do to succeed. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. It's always great to see that and know that we're helping. And if there's anything here that wasn't so helpful, leave feedback, leave a comment. We always improve based on what you provide, and we're here for you. So, good luck on your TOEFL. Click on the link below if you'd like to practice the question, get more help. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video to your TOEFL speaking success and TOEFL success overall. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.